Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Bankard, and I'm here with a friend on the psychic plane. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
It's time for a soup party. I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. I had managed to forget about that moment. That was really weird. This whole movie is really weird. We'll get into it. So those were references to the film we are here to review today called I Saw the TV Glow. It premiered at Sundance this year, and it is now in theaters. So the rest of us plebes get to finally see it because it was one of those Sundance movies that was not available to everybody online. And had a lot of buzz. It was basically, in terms of buzz, the equivalent of Past Lives to a lesser degree, I think. Like, it's the one everyone was talking about and then no one could see. So, we're really excited to get into it. And as we were talking right before we started recording, this one's a little tricky to summarize, and we'd like to spoil as little as possible because it is a very spoilable movie. I think if you don't, it's one of those things where it's like the less you know about it going in, I think the better. But the basic premise takes place in the 90s. It follows two teenagers who become friends and bond over this TV show that they really love. And it's sort of like a coming of age with a twist. We will not get into what the twist is until we get to spoiler mode, I think. Did I do okay? Was that sufficient?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I would merely add that it's a very 90s kind of TV show that is a fictional TV show that's sort of a mix of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Eerie, Indiana, and like late night Nickelodeon shows like Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Right. Yeah, so there is a little bit of a horror element to it. We'll get into all that, I think, in recommendation algorithm to sort of map out, okay, what genres do you need to know or enjoy to get into this movie? But if you're listening to us for the first time, as I just sort of alluded to, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen the film. And this one is a little bit with smaller films like this one, ones that people are not already in the mainstream kind of hyped for it, like something like Furiosa that's going to be coming down the pipeline. We like to do a little bit more of a spoiler-free section because we know it's like not necessarily on people's radars. And then we'll make a very clear spoiler warning and then get into that for the rest of the show. PT, if listeners think we're appointment viewing television after listening to this episode, what can they do?
If you don't want to have to wait for your friend to leave you a VHS tape of an episode so you can catch up, please follow wherever you are listening to this show right now, wherever you get your podcasts. Look for the Long Take Review. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. But you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, and more. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review and on Letterboxd at LTR Pod.
Amazing. Thank you, PT. So we are just about ready to get into our discussion of I Saw the TV Glow. But first, we do have an unavoidable and I think pretty enjoyable movie news update.
Just in off the wire, it's your Hollywood news.
All right, so I don't know about you, but I've engineered my social media feed that apparently I'm just getting Cannes all the time. Cannes Film Festival is in full swing, and there have been some pretty big premieres. I'm seeing lots of amazing red carpet coverage, lots of reactions of people on the ground watching these movies for the first time. So I just want to kind of open it up. PT, what big movies, or what are you, actually I should ask you personally, what are you more excited about now because you've kind of heard about it from Cannes?
Oh, wow. That is a good phrasing of the question because that changes my answer on it. Because the movie I'm most excited about continues to be Furiosa. No information out of Cannes has lessened my desire to see it. They're mostly positive, if not universally positive. I feel like in the back of my mind there might have been some sort of like, I don't know, but even the people, it all seems like everyone's very stoked about it. The thing that has me maybe most intrigued is I believe our friend, who's not really our friend, our parasocial friend Sean Fennessy, put on Letterboxd that the first Mad Max movie is the one that most reminds him of Furiosa, which is fascinating. So I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued how that could turn out. But the movie that I guess I have grown to be excited about based on the responses is a movie called The Substance, which I'm now trying to pull up more
This is the
information.
Demi Moore body
Demi
horror
Moore,
one.
Margaret Qualley, Dennis Quaid. Yeah. Coralie Farge is maybe how you say her name. Fargiat. I apologize for not knowing how best to pronounce it, but it's in competition. The Deadline website has a quick summary that's David Lynch's Mulholland Drive and David Cronenberg's Dead Ringers, but starring Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley. And like, that sounds really interesting. And it feels like there's been a lot of soft reactions to movies, lengthy ovations, which people love to report minute lengths on standing ovations, but that the reviews have been pretty tepid to openly mean, especially on movies in competition. And this is the one that feels like a lot of people are like, oh, actually, it's really good if you are okay with possible body horror elements, which not
Right.
everybody is, including Jen Bankert. So, what
Yeah.
are you hearing about? What's got you
Well,
excited, Jen?
I was just gonna say that I remember when I was kind of going through all the canned previews that this one, when people would describe it, I'm like, that doesn't sound like anything I would care about or want to watch. And it also just sounded weird. I'm like, Demi Moore, who I didn't know was still acting, Dennis Quaid, and then Margaret Qualley, like as a trio, that just seems weird. But apparently, Margaret Qualley is like, it seems like the main topic or the theme is like aging and sort of society's expectations of beauty and aging and stuff like that, and that's sort of the crux of it. And so that sounds really, once I learned that, then I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. But yeah, the reviews for this definitely caught my attention, where I was just like, oh, like everyone is raving about this and saying it's just like, be all end all kind of game changer sort of film. So I wonder if that'll be in contention for the Palme d'Or. We'll have to see. um
There are
there was
still a bunch of movies that have not premiered yet,
That's
so
true. So we
that's
get a little bit more
we're
time.
only halfway through. At time of recording. So
Yeah.
what has intrigued you from the
So, I
festival?
mean, this generally has been a pretty good week for my draft picks, because Bird, which I had on my list, generally positive reviews. Some people were saying it was like not as edgy as Andrea Arnold's past films, but other than that, other people being like, "Oh, the tone of this is not what I would expect. It was a little bit like nicer or whatever, but still had a little bit of an edge." Um, but yeah, generally people are very excited. They're saying it's her strongest film to date, all that kind of stuff. So I'm like, okay, good, we're tracking. So I'm excited to see that. And actually, like the for me, the two big takeaway is the train wreck that seems to be Megalopolis. Uh, like, in both positively and negatively, I would say, because like it's really weird, because I feel like I now have a better understanding about how big of a mess this movie probably is, but at the same time it kind of makes me want to see it more. Like, it's like definitely like a rubbernecking situation
Mm-hmm.
where I'm just like, oh. And I'm not going to repeat what I heard on, I think it was Next Best Picture, because two of that crew is actually at Cannes, and they just released their first sort of like big Cannes episode yesterday or today. I was listening to it today. I'm not gonna say what it is, but they low key spoiled like a thing that happens in the movie that is like wilder than I ever could have imagined. Just in terms of like a thing that might happen at a movie. And again, I'm sorry that that's a frustrating tease. I do not want to spoil it, even to PT.
I mean, I believe I know what it is because this is something that people have not been. I won't say what it is either for the sake of our listeners, but if you are the kind of person listening to this who's interested in hearing about it, if you look like Megalopolis reactions, people are going to talk about an
Okay.
element in this movie to the degree that like you maybe shouldn't even look up the reactions. Just trust us that the most positive reactions are like, it's wild and like you don't expect it. And it feels like most of the sort of middle median or mean, I don't know math, but the sort of the largest portion of the reactions is something around like it's just a big old mess, and you can maybe enjoy it because it's a mess, or you can just be like, oh, I'm wasting my time watching this, but it's not a strong cohesive narrative.
Yeah, and
And
there
Greg,
was
not here to defend his
I
pick.
know, sorry. I feel bad. He's on vacation and we're beating him up for his his draft
Well,
pick.
we're beating up his pick. He made a great pick. I would have picked it if he hadn't.
Sure. And well, so here's the other thing to kind of understand why this movie is such a big deal. On the press junket for Cannes specifically, Francis Ford Coppola kind of made this big speech that was like, I'm leaving it all on the table. Like he knows he's old and is going to die soon, and is like, I don't want to die having regretted not just giving it my all and doing everything I wanted to do. I believe the quote that he had said was something to the effect of, and I do all these amazing things, I do what I want to do, and then when I die I won't even notice. Like I think it's the quote. It's just like, it's just great. It's amazing. So I think, so that's the feeling I get. And like, people seem to be split of two minds. Like, everyone agrees that it's like this big, capacious, what is going on kind of movie. But some people are like, and therefore it's bad. And other people are like, wow, what an auteur. You know what I mean? Like,
well, and there are Francis Ford Coppola movies from after what was historically considered his sort of glory run, which was just those 4 movies from the 70s, but movies from the 80s, even through the 90s, that at the time it was sort of like, well, he's lost his way, and very similar sort of, he's off the rails, no one can contain him, this is wild and bonkers, blah blah blah, that have gotten some real evaluations. The Cotton Club, One for the Heart, I mean, and people speak up for Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula and The Rainmaker into the 90s, and at the time those were sort of dismissed, but people have come back and found them. So it's tough. It's like, are people trying to sort of pre-correct of like, oh, this looks bad, but maybe it's actually good and I just don't realize it? Or are they being more open-hearted and being like, oh, actually some of his choices that maybe seem strange in the artifice sense and in the way he's structuring this are actually positive and enjoyable, and even if they're odd or abnormal, we should accept it. So I agree with you. I only want to see it more, even if the other story around the movie is that he was being a creep to women on set to get them, quote, in the mood for a big party scene. He was just like grabbing them and kissing them, which I don't think is going to get anyone in the mood. No offense to Francis Ford Coppola at age, 78 or 79 when he was doing that. But like, calm down.
there was one critic that had a great way of describing this, and I can't remember who it was, but it was hardcore grandpa behavior. Like,
Yes.
or grandpa antics. Like, like, so not that excuses that, obviously.
So just to briefly touch on a couple of other movies that have premiered, again, to some mixed reactions, mixed to openly bad reactions. I'll start with, I guess, openly bad, which is the Kevin Costner Horizon: An American Saga Chapter 1. Apparently Chapter 1 of 4, according to his plan. Which basically means it's a miniseries. It's because it's going to be 12 hours, I guess.
I mean, it's basically his Yellowstone, right? Like,
Right.
he left Yellowstone and he's like, I'm just making my own now.
Yeah, but now there's I think they're like they're kind of looking, they're taking the test, but like looking over at Francis Ford Coppola's paper, because they're like, actually Kevin Costner's been trying to make this for 25 years, and it's like, wait, has he? Like, I've never heard of this until now. But yeah, apparently this is a story he's been kicking around, and the reactions are mostly that it's boring, but that like, it's gonna, that like dads are gonna love it. It's like, this is gonna be a great dad movie. The people who love Yellowstone will love it. So it's a little unclear if this is like actually very bad, if this is like, this could be like the best case scenario for at this point is a Dial of Destiny situation where it's like, this is not something that's going to appeal to the people who are going to see movies at Cannes, whether it's the festival goers or the critics. This is a slice of Americana that's just not going to be appealing to them. The thing that I've been sort of the most intrigued about is considering Kevin Costner did Dances with Wolves and considering we're a year out from Killers of the Flower Moon. All the trailers make it look like the Native Americans are just a sort of generic amorphous evil force of nature, basically, that exists outside of the goodly or badly white people that are trying to conquer the land. And it sounds like there is more to it than that there are actual like characters with names that you get to know and maybe care about. And that's good. Like I was worried that it wouldn't have that. That's not going to be enough necessarily to save the movie. But like considering his biggest success is directing and starring in Dances with Wolves, I would assume that like even if it's a super simplistic type story about like Indians, are we sure they're bad? Like that, at least there's some element of that there, and as part of it. So yeah, again, I'll probably still go see it. The 3 hours does sound arduous, but a lot of people cast of thousands, and he's trying to get people to give him money to do the back half of this story, which, if he actually does get it done, how interesting. What an interesting thing that could happen.
I just wanted on record that, because you brought up Killers of the Flower Moon, if these movies have more problematic representations in them, or just even like you're saying, sort of like dated representations of them or oversimplified, and we just give Kevin Costner a free pass where we like really put Marty through the ringer and like said like, well, but was this enough?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He tried to shift the positionality of all the characters in this movie, but wasn't enough. And I'm one of those people. I was one of those people who was like questioning, like, just because this was pretty good for Martin's, like someone, a director, a veteran director like Martin Scorsese, does that make it as sort of progressive as it's trying to be? Right? Like those are real questions. But if we are not having that conversation with these movies and just say like, great job, Kevin Costner. No, not okay.
That's very fair. I'm worried about that. Although as a white man, I never question Martin Scorsese and his representation. I'm just kidding. I did question that, but I'm more worried that this movie's going to make like $150 million because like dads are going to be like, let's go see it on the big screen.
Well, that's the thing is like, if it's the uncomplicated West and it's not asking its viewers to feel uncomfortable in the way that Killers of the Flower Moon, I think, does really well in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
That would account, you know what I mean? Like yes, obviously it would make a lot more money.
Right. I guess. But then it's also interesting that like, this is not a genre that people have been flocking to. So it will be interesting if like, this is the thing that revitalizes the Western. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
For my hype draft, in addition to the movie we're talking about today, which was one of my hype draft picks, my big hype draft contribution was Kinds of Kindness, the new Yorgos Lanthimos movie, which I didn't feel like people were saying, oh, this is bad. They were like, people are not going to like this. That like, this is very like mean and dark, and it's more Dogtooth, Lobster, Killing of a Sacred Deer Yorgos, and less Favorite and Poor Things Yorgos. It was a little, which were very weird, but were a little bit more audience friendly. And that this is, he's got his hackles back up, which it's very possible that means that, there will be more people who do not care for it, especially if they saw and liked Poor Things and are like, great, we can't wait. I'm glad another movie's out right away. Wait a minute, what? And it's three short films linked together. They're each like 40 something minutes, 45 minutes. And it adds up to like 2.5 or 2 hours and 45 minutes, I guess. So you've all figured out that math. I have something wrong there, but it's long, and it's an anthology, and apparently not likable characters, but the people who, it's basically like, if you like Yorgos, you'll have a great time, but the people who are on the fence are going to go on the other side of the fence.
I have seen a lot of people who are self-proclaimed Yorgos fans saying we are so back. Like,
yes,
it's a good use of that new catchphrase.
Or maybe they
Yeah.
never left.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. Well, I feel like a lot of the reviews I've seen have been like, I loved this. This was amazing. People who are like, their ceiling for Yorgos Lanthimos
Yes.
is the favorite are going to be like, what is this?
Right.
So in terms of weirdness and like, yeah, because
This is
it's also marks a return. It's largely the shift in the writer too, right? Tony McNamara did The Favorite and Poor Things, and then now we're shifting back to the writer he was working with previously,
right.
whose name escapes me at the moment. But um, so yeah, I'm
Yeah.
excited. Jesse Plemons also getting a lot of love.
This is probably not the path for Academy Award winner Jesse Plemons, because it's probably going to be a movie that folks are cold on because it's so weird. So yeah, the people who are looking at this from the what's going to happen, maybe the Academy Awards, are like, don't, maybe screenplay, but that's it. This is too weird. And you know, again, amin is the word that kept coming up, and a lot of use of the sickos from The Onion, of just like, haha, yes, like just sickos looking in from the window. That's going to be that's going to be us. That's going to be me enjoying this movie sometime in June. But yeah, that other people, normal people, normies, if you will not necessarily be appealing to it. Although, yeah, people are saying Jesse Plemons, highlight Emma Stone killing it, Hong Chow killing it. Like, everyone's great. Willem Dafoe off the rails, as he should be. So yeah, it sounds interesting, but it also sounds like it's very possible the Kinds of Kindness episode is going to once again be just you and me, and you begrudgingly agreeing to be on it, with Antonio and Greg on the text thread being like, "That's okay, that's all right. I can't make it. That's all right. I'm fine."
No, I'll be there. It's fine.
Thank you,
I'm
Jen.
excited to talk about it, see it, and talk about it. All right. Any other pot shots we want to take? Because I feel like everything else we have on this list that's in front of me has not gotten good reviews.
Well, the Jim Henson the last thing I will say is the Jim Henson documentary, which is the Ron
Okay.
Howard documentary. It's not supposed to be like overwhelming, but just a very warm embrace of the legacy of Jim Henson, which sounds lovely and wonderful. And I'm excited. I'm excited to see that in the way that we saw the Sesame Street documentary a year or two ago and the Mr. Rogers one. So, great. Sounds good.
The main criticism that I've heard of that movie is that it plays it too safe. It's too sanitized. It doesn't.
From Ron Howard?
I know. Ron Howard. And it's a movie about Jim Henson, sponsored by Disney, right? So it's like, that can only get so deep. But love Jim Henson, love the Muppets. So yeah, I'm there. Even if it is the safer version of the documentary, not the real one.
And we probably, maybe you want to cut this out. Apparently Donald Trump's already threatened to sue the people who made The Apprentice, and the guy who used to own the Washington football team, aka Washington Commanders, aka Washington ethnic slurs, apparently funded the movie thinking it was going to be pro-Trump, and has been complaining to the director and has been trying to get it changed for the last 6 months. And apparently it's not very good. Like, I guess it's fine. Like, it doesn't. It's not like positive. The acting,
I was hoping,
is good.
Yeah, I was hoping that meant that the movie was very good, because it was like really going for it.
Well, I guess it's good in terms of it being on the right side of history, and that it depicts him as a narcissistic, like, the birth of a narcissistic monster. But it's not like necessarily engaging outside of sort of hitting the checkpoints of this section of a famous person's life. Potentially Jeremy Strong, supporting actor, is the only thing people think
interesting
might come out of it, because they don't think Sebastian Stan is like so overwhelmingly great that anyone would want to give any awards to someone portraying Donald Trump in the year of our Lord 2024 or 2025, when who knows what the state of the situation is.
Oh, in terms of, does that have a distributor?
I don't know if it got one yet.
Okay. Because I feel like that makes it less likely that it like doesn't come out for a while or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's more locked down. If it
right. Yeah, I don't see anything on here that it has a studio. Maybe this doesn't list studios though. I mean, I shouldn't. This is a waste.
I'm really curious about what kind of performance Maria Bakalova gives in that movie, because all I can picture is her in the Borat sequel, and which she was excellent in, but it's a very different tone than I feel like a biopic about Donald
Well,
Trump's early life probably would
well,
have.
apparently the big scene is that there's something where like Roy Cohn is going to jail, or maybe he's dying, like something's happening with him in his
Mhm.
life, and it's contrasted with the accusation that Donald raped Ivana. Which later in life, Ivana, when he started running for president, Ivana was like, "I never really meant that," and so it's not like actually a rape scene, but it's like clearly like
Mm.
unwelcome sexual advances, and that's what he's suing over, or he's claiming he's not going to because
Oh,
he's
I
full of
see.
crap, but he's saying he'll sue over it because it's defamation of character, even though it's actually the like lighter version of what his former wife said happened. There's no distributor in America. Studio Canal has it in England and
Oh,
Ireland,
interesting.
or the
Okay.
UK and Ireland, but nothing yet in America. And we can never talk about it again. That's fine.
All right. I saw the TV Glow. Should we get
Yeah,
into it?
good
All
movie.
right. So, is that your short take?
Uh, sure. No. We'll do it for real. We'll do it for real.
Okay. PT, what was your general reaction to I Saw the TV Glow?
I was very positive to this. This is a movie, and I don't want to say struggle to talk about it, but as we struggle to talk about it before the spoiler section,
Mm-hmm.
it was, as it unfolded, there were multiple moments where I was like, "Am I getting this? Am I connecting to it?" It's not a easy movie, I don't think, but I do ultimately think it was very rich and very rewarding. I think it had a lot of layers of meaning and had a lot of different avenues through which a viewer could approach it and sort of take away something that's important and special to them, while also kind of getting a glimpse into, oh, this is maybe a life, this is a struggle, this is a uh, you know complicated series of emotional truths that exist in other people that maybe are not my truths, but I get to see and sort of feel and experience them through this movie. I think that that's my sort of short take with the appendix of, it really nails like 1996 through like a few years after that in like really precise ways, and super enjoyable, like fun, like nostalgia bait like
Mm-hmm.
approaches, which I think the movie that intentionally plays with. But yeah, I thought it was really good. I think it wasn't, again, not like an easy breezy movie, but I think a very rich and rewarding one. How about you, Jen?
So, I enjoyed it. I still don't know if I totally 100% understand it in terms of like, I think my letterbox review kind of landed on, I know that this movie has a lot to say. I'm not totally sure if it's giving me enough, me personally, enough to help me understand what it has to say. And that might just be like as time goes on, and maybe even as we talk about it over the course of this episode, then I will kind of like, it'll click into place and I'll get it. But there's just a lot. To me, there was a lot going on, but then also the pace, and I think this is intentional, the pace is pretty slow. Um the runtime's not that long, but the pace is slow. And there's a point at which it sort of like kicks into another gear. But even then, I feel like it does have this kind of like slow, eerie, contemplative tone to it, which I think maybe this is the problem with my expectations. I just didn't know that's the type of movie it was going to be. Because it was, I definitely, people coming out of Sundance were sort of pitching it as, oh yeah, like it's a love letter to popular culture, it's a love letter to 90s television. And I'm not saying it's not those things, but that, like, if you describe this movie that way, I feel like it's misleading because there's a lot more going on, and it's sort of like a lot like creepier, more melancholy, which I really enjoyed. I just like, it took me like, I had to kind of constantly recalibrate my brain as I was watching this movie because for some reason I had like different expectations. I think I thought I was getting Stranger Things, and what I got was not like Spielberg inspired Stranger Things, but the like David Cronenberg and David Lynch inspired
Right.
Stranger Things, but in the 90s. And so once I kind of like got on board with that idea, I was like, oh, okay, like I can get into this movie now. But yeah, I feel like it's like I don't have a clean like this is what this movie's about necessarily explanation ready to go, but I feel like maybe from talking to you I'll get there. So that's sort of my short take. But yeah, I would agree with you that the 90s aspect of this really on point and very enjoyable. And actually like I've heard a couple other sort of critics mention this as I was kind of like browsing through Letterboxd and stuff, but it really captures the feeling of being someone in the 90s watching TV, like the experience of it. And it's not just because there's like, recording things on VHS tapes. There's a like historical component to this, right? That is not actually that important, I don't think, to the point of the movie. But yeah, it just it captures like a feeling really well, while also kind of being super creepy. I will say that for I got a little concerned as I was waiting for this movie to start because, and maybe now we're moving into recommendation algorithm, so maybe I'll just say that we're going to do that because I think what I'm about to say falls in that category. So a recommendation algorithm in which we establish the audience of a film and also kind of the genre. So I got like 80% horror trailers
Yeah. I was
before
thinking
this
about
movie.
that.
And I was just sitting there being like, wait a minute. What does this mean? Because I think I also didn't really know, based on the buzz from Sundance, I think people didn't make it clear that it is borrowing from a lot of horror tropes. And so I got very concerned. I feel like it's not actually that scary.
I was going to say, I think to the degree that you may have had to recalibrate and be disappointed if you were like, this is Stranger Things, if someone went in thinking this is even Poltergeist, let alone like a super scary movie, I think that they would leave quite disappointed. They would be like, oh, this wasn't anything. They were like, there's nothing happened.
But I feel like the implied marketing of the trailers that I saw definitely thought that the person sitting in the audience was someone who was there for a horror movie. And in
Yes.
a way,
maybe the thinking was the people who go to see this movie watched Are You Afraid of the Dark in the 90s, which means they now love these horror movies in the year 2024.
That's fair. How should we pitch this movie to people? Like, who is going to like this movie? And also, how do we kind of make it so they don't have the experience I have in terms of like having in real time to recalibrate their expectations of what type of movie it is?
Well, and I would also say I want them to not have necessarily the experience that I had, which was the sort of one line description of it that I saw really like gets into what happens in the final like third of the movie, which means I spent the first 2/3 being like, I wonder when X is going to happen, because that's what I've heard this described as. And so, that happens sometimes. Some of those trailers that you saw seem to very clearly be setting up like everything but the final 10 minutes of the movie, assuming we saw the same trailers, which we don't. Again, we're for some reason we're being very cagey about. But Evil James McAvoy.
Okay, fine. Okay, yes, that's the one I was going to talk about because oh my gosh, that looks terrifying. I will never see that movie.
Yeah.
Why is James McAvoy doing scary movies? I don't know, because he did all the
he was Glass? Split. Yeah, he
Split.
was.
Okay,
yeah, which I have never actually seen, but I've heard he's pretty unnerving in that because he's got different personalities. They're split.
Yeah, but I feel like he's devolved into like this like scary character actor, and I'm not okay with it. I want him to be Professor Xavier again.
I mean, sure. I feel like this doesn't mean he only does those movies, but yeah.
No, I know.
He did look very scary in that movie because he looked like a believably unhinged person. Anyway, yeah, so it's interesting about how to describe this. What I will say, and I hope this isn't something that anybody listening would feel like, oh, I don't want to know about that. I think it's really important that the writer director is trans and non-binary, and that has infused their other work similarly, I think, to this movie. So I feel like it maybe that's never like an explicit component of this movie. This is not a movie about trans characters, but it's a movie about like not fully feeling like your identity is accurate, or that like the life you're living is actually the life that is truly you or truly yours. And I think part of why this movie works so well is that it's kind of set as life in the suburbs in the late 90s created that feeling for a lot of people. And some of that was like move away from your hometown, go to the nearest city, go to a faraway city, just go to college and like be able, even if you go back there later, at least go have that experience. And that will, help you shake out of that. But yeah, I think that it's taking that sort of wrestling with like basically who am I don't feel like I fit in here. I don't feel like this makes sense to me. And finding an outlet for that in a sort of random obscure and kind of very cheesy late mid to late 90s TV show, and having that kind of fandom connection to something, and the real life interpersonal relationships that can come from that, whatever. I don't want to say it's fake, but you're like, well, I just like this thing. But then like you meet people and you bond with people over this thing that you like. And so, I think that all of that's kind of a stew. And if that's intriguing to you at all, if that sounds familiar or it sounds like an interesting story, I think that this would really resonate with you. But I also think that if you're interested in all of that serving as an allegory for gender identity and that sort of questioning the gender binary, that's also quite fruitful, and I think that's helpful in seeing the movie. So I don't know, what do
Yeah.
you think?
So yeah, I feel like the main expectation to set is that this is not in of itself a piece of the pop culture that it's talking about,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not recreating. I mean, it does in certain scenes
Right.
recreate fictional shows that are very, very eerily close to like shows from the 90s that I've actually seen. We could talk about that in spoiler mode, I guess, but like it is a deep meditation on how popular culture's role in identity formation, right? And both in terms of facilitating it and interfering with it, I think, which is the interesting thing about this movie. Is that, and that was the other thing I was like, wait, is this movie pro this or anti this? And we'll talk about what this is in spoiler mode. You know what I mean? But like I was
Yes.
like, and if the whole point is that we're kind of living in that it's a both and situation and we're kind of like saying it's all true all at once, then I'm
Right.
fine with that. But I just
Mm-hmm.
wasn't clear if that was the case. So I'm going to be asking about that in spoiler mode.
Yeah. Well, no, we'll
For
get there.
sure.
I think the comparison you make is strong, and also the to Stranger Things. I didn't finish that thought. The comparison to Stranger Things is a good one. Um, Especially like the contrast with it. Whereas like you can go into Stranger Things and be like, I liked Steven Spielberg and John Carpenter and Stephen King in the 80s. I want to see something that feels like that. And this is more like I like David Lynch and David Cronenberg and Snick in the 90s. I want something that's reflecting on that. Like I want something that's sort of like you kind of get
Like, what
moments
did
that
that
are,
mean? Yeah.
yeah, but it isn't just sort of a new version of that to fill, like to
Right.
hit that nostalgia button inside you. It's sort of like standing next to you and pointing at your nostalgia for it and being like, what's up with that? Like, what was that about? And engaging, I think, more in a conversation with you. So yeah, again, we're just promising all these things to get into in spoiler territory, which the good people watching who don't want spoilers will just have to go see the movie and wait. But I think one of the sort of multi-layer choices in the movie to sort of be like, here's something about the 90s. It's nostalgic for the 90s, but also questioning about that, is that the father of the main character is played by Fred Durst of the band Limp Bizkit, which I think is like a really smart choice to be like, hey, the 90s, they weren't everything that, it's not everything you remember that you liked. There is also Fred Durst. Like, here you go. He also was there. And, sorry to the Limp Bizkit fans that are out there. But I think for a lot of the people who would come to this movie being like, yes, Buffy, yes, Goosebumps, yes, The Adventures of Pete and Pete. Yes, Eerie, Indiana. I'm super excited about coming to see this. And then opening the door to, I did it all for the Nookie, is like a thing that's like, wait a minute, no, that's not me. So I think that I think it's working on some really interesting levels. And again, it's not. I feel bad. I feel like it's a negative. I have in my mind the time that I was standing with Antonio at in public talking to regular people, and someone was like, "Past lives, what was that about?" And I was like, "Well, it's very quiet." And Tony was like, "That's a terrible way to start describing a movie,
I know.
because that sounds like it's really bad." Because I think that's good, but so I think that calling this movie like difficult is also sounds comparably bad, but it is, and I think it's in really good ways. I think that's in like engaging ways
Yeah.
that made it something that I kept thinking about, for the hours after the movie and into today, when I was just like, what's going on?
I would say if I'm pitching purely on entertainment value, right? Because I think that's what Antonio's pushing back on you for, to be like, don't talk about how art house it is, like talk about what the entertaining parts of it are. For me, for this movie, I think I would say the 90s, everything 90s related. So if you were a child in the 90s, go see this movie. You will feel something. And then the other thing is, I would throw X-Files into your list of shows that you just mentioned, because I feel like my favorite thing about this movie, other than kind of like the rich like thematic work that's going on that I'm not totally sure about, but I know it's there and I like it, is the creepiness. It's just like the ambiance of like, this movie is amazing at taking something that seems really innocuous in real life and filming it and staging it in a way that makes it look so alien and so creepy. Like, they'll be like, and this is not a spoiler, they'll be like, they go into like a high school cafeteria, but all the tables are flipped over. They're like round tables, and so you just see all these like circles with like little spiky legs sticking up. It looks so weird, but it's like just a normal thing that probably would happen. You know what I mean? It's like they weren't using the tables, or they're cleaning the room or whatever, so they just flipped over the tables. But the way it's shot looks so weird, and that's just like that's like a pretty tame one. Like, there are a bunch of other shots in this where I'm just like, this is something that should be like we normally associate with being kind of like either innocent or happy, and somehow it has turned it into this horrifying creepy thing that just seems like totally from another planet. So I really enjoyed like the production design and the camera work and stuff like that for that reason.
And I will say, I think we haven't actually said their name yet, but Jane Schoenbrun is the writer director, and I went and today watched their first movie, or their first feature movie, which is We're All Going to the World's Fair, which is like it's sort of found. It's not entirely found footagey, but a lot of it is as if capturing what would be seen through a webcam of a character that's doing a viral like creepypasta challenge, and that movie didn't work for me as well as this one did. But it's like you can see. It was interesting to watch it now after I saw the TV glow, because it was like, oh yeah, like so many smart like just camera positions and framing of shots in a very much lower budget. And this is not like I Saw the TV Glow isn't a high budget movie. It doesn't come across that way, but this seemed like a micro budget. And I think it only emphasized how big the leap forward was in terms of the production, in terms of the different locations, and all the ways in which they capture the various vibes they are looking for in this movie, which I think is pretty impressive. So I think, hopefully that intrigued people who were not otherwise interested in seeing this, because I do think people would find it very rewarding. The one like anti-recommendation, which maybe that's going too far to even say that, is we were talking coming home from it, and Jasmine was like, I'm glad I didn't see that movie in a time in my life when I was unhappy with where I was. Like, I was unhappy with like the choices I had made, because it's so much about feeling kind of trapped and looking for like some sort of an outlet, that may be something that is too resonant, even if you're an adult, and you're living, not living a high school teenage life, but you're grown up, that you could maybe be kind of rocked by how deep that movie kind of gets in and starts touching and talking about, like, doesn't it feel like this isn't what you wanted? Doesn't this feel like this isn't where you were supposed to be? And it's just like, oh God, that, like, it's, if you're feeling relatively good, it's unnerving enough. But that, yeah, if you were, we both were talking about, there were times in our lives, adult lives, when this could have been like very devastating, as
Yeah.
like, oh my God. So I don't know. That's something, I guess, to
So
keep in
maybe the
mind.
right audience for this then, or another audience that I would recommend this to, are teenagers. Because I feel like even though to a teenager, a lot of all the 90s stuff won't make any sense and it will
Yeah.
feel very much like a period film. I was listening to The Big Picture did an interview with Jane Schoenbrun, and it was a great interview. And Sean Fennessy said that they are one of the filmmakers working today that best understands growing up in the internet age, or like a filmmaker that, rather than, I think the context was like, rather than avoid cell phones, because apparently this is the thing that filmmakers do, like period pieces are now so popular because current filmmakers do not want to deal with like technology and social media in their movies. And Jane Schoenbrun's response to that was like, they're cowards. It was great. um, but my point was that even though teenagers in 2024 are going to be like, wait, what are VHS tapes? And just be completely stymied by the sort of period aspect of this movie, I do feel like the experience these characters have is going to be striking a chord with them, right? That they're going to relate to it, or a lot of them
Yeah.
might relate to it in a big way. So
I think that's right. And I think, I think we may be, with pundits in general, or maybe it's people our age, who, it start to be like, well, the kids don't want to see it because it's all like old and they're on their fancy phones. But I think that it's not that different from us watching something that's set when it was like, you pick up a phone and you go, operator, and then there's a person that just is like, yeah, and you tell them who to, and it was like, that's weird, that's not how a phone works. And your parents had to be like, no, it was like, there was just a person waiting. Or if there was a phone number, it was actually like a word and then some numbers, because it was about where they are, and that, whatever, it was different back then. That, like, we got it, like, we could follow it, it was fine. And I think you're right, the experience is universal enough, and taps into so many things that I think would still resonate. Plus, I think that kids think the 90s are like this, like,
yeah, the
magical
90s are in.
era of the past, where it's like, oh, like, you could just walk to a plane and get on it. Like, you didn't have security, which isn't true, but there was very little security in comparison. And like, oh, all the things that, like, they think are bad, that, like, didn't exist. It was this heyday of times in the 90s. So I think that, yeah, I do think that, like, I think teenagers might really relate to this and appeal to it. This would appeal to them, I think, is what I was trying to say.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's get into it. I'm amazed we made it this far without spoiling this movie.
I know. Go see this movie, folks. If you've got the time and you have any inclination, I think it is worth seeing, and certainly worth supporting.
And it was a movie that, as soon as I got out of the theater, I was like, I'm so glad we're recording this later today, because I just need to talk to somebody about this movie that I just saw. So if that also appeals to you, right? Like, if you like movies that you can sort of go to dinner with your friends and be like, so what was that about? Like, what did that mean? This is a perfect movie for that.
Agreed.
All right. Spoiler mode. So if you've not seen I Saw the TV Glow, like we just said, you should go see it. It's a really interesting movie. Come back and rejoin us for the rest of the conversation. All right. So, PT, you actually put a specific Letterboxd review in here?
I did, because I feel like it gives a perspective that, neither of us can actually speak to. I don't want to read the whole thing because it's pretty long, but just to read like a little excerpt of it, sort of about the movie. This could have possibly gone in the pre-spoiler, but I didn't want to risk it. So this is from Letterboxd user Mesh509, who I do not know, but I just happened to find. I don't know if other people do this, if letterbox nerds out there, where you go see a movie and you're like, what did my friends say of the like
Mm-hmm.
20 people I follow? And then you look at their reviews, then you look at what reviews they liked. This was like one step away. I forget who it was who liked this, but someone I knew liked this review, and I ended up seeing it. I thought it was really good. So it opens with, "My name is Julie. I'm a trans woman, and tonight is the first time I've said those words to anyone other than myself." And then there's a couple of paragraphs sort of talking about their sort of journey, about their questions around gender and how they've approached it. And then after that, the third main paragraph is, "Watching I Saw the TV Glow tonight, I saw myself up there on the screen in a way I never thought I'd see in a film. My exact experience with dysphoria had been perfectly, devastatingly articulated. Transness and gender dysphoria are never directly mentioned in the film, but it's unmistakably there in the text. It's about the dangers and horrors of living behind a facade, of denying your true identity and living as a shell of yourself. It's a film rooted in the feeling of realizing your body isn't yours. Your life isn't yours. The memories you thought were happy and normal now feel false, like you were seeing someone else's memories the whole time and you were just not a real person, a spectator in your own life. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when you push all that down for too long until it eventually comes roaring back up and it's too late to do anything about it. But that's the thing. It's not too late. It's never too late. There is still time." Which is
And
what
that's
was
something
written.
written in chalk on
That's
the
what
street in the
the
movie.
last time we see Maddy is the chalk drawings that we have seen throughout the movie on the yard, on the sidewalk in front of the main character's house when she's walking away the last time. It says "there is still time" written in chalk. So yeah, I mean, that just felt like a necessary and useful perspective that, again, like, I don't think either of us can bring as cisgendered people, that like that component and how it speaks to it. It seems like, from reading through the reviews, that people who do have experiences with questioning their, having gender dysphoria, questioning or knowing their non-binariness or their transness, have really responded to this as like, yep, that's what it's like. That's what it feels like when like you have this sort of, these things that you connect to and this sort of outlets that you find, and then you get confronted with this, and actually maybe you need to make a step to do something about it. And our main character chooses not to, and chooses to go back. And it doesn't look like it's great for him at the end of the movie.
No, and I think this was Dan. It's one of the folks over at Next Best Picture. Their letterbox review, I think it was Dan Bear, but said something to the effect of the ending of him just continually apologizing to everyone he walks by,
with no one caring or paying any attention to him.
right? But the fact that he feels the need to apologize for like his what's like, caged inside him actually like creeping out, or like the anguish that he feels over a lifetime of not being who he really is, right? That the fact that he then feels the need to kind of like apologize to every single person he sees for that like, I think the comment was that is actually the true horror of this movie, right?
Right.
Is that like that's the saddest and scariest part. It's not necessarily him ripping, like cutting through his chest and ripping it open in the scene that happens right before that, right? Like, it's actually the aftermath of him coming out of the bathroom and then, feeling like he has to apologize to everybody else. So yeah, and this is I really wish that maybe I had read this before I had seen the movie, because like I'm just too dense, and I didn't pick up on the extent to which this was very clearly about trans identity. And I, like, you know what I mean? Because I feel like I knew, like, I sort of had projected that sense onto, or that interpretation onto, the Maddy character, but I was kind of all over the place with the Owen character. Because there, it's never explicitly mentioned. And not that I needed a scene where he's like, guess what, Maddy, I'm a, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't want that. I'm not saying I wanted that or needed that, but to me, I like, until we get that intercutting of him putting on the nightgown of the Tara character
Mm-hmm.
from um, the Pink Opaque. That was the only first moment where I was like, oh wait, maybe I've kind of misunderstood this character, or like what is the issue that this character is struggling with. Because in that the bleacher scene much earlier in the film, he just says something that's very, and I think this is also sort of the genius of this movie is that it is, like we were saying earlier, like both works at sort of a universal level and this very specific level, right? And this very specific experience that this filmmaker is trying to express and kind of convey through the story. The bleacher scene, Owen just says something like, he goes through that really beautiful monologue of talking about how he feels like something's ripped out of his inside and that he's hollow, but he's too afraid to check, right? I thought that was really beautifully written. But then he just says, my parents know there's something wrong with me. They just, even if they don't say it, I know there's something wrong with me. But then he never says like what that something is. And again, I didn't necessarily want him to say it in that moment, but I needed, as the dense viewer, I needed more help in terms of like, because my mind went to like, because he is very, the way that he interacts socially with other people in the world, to me, was sort of coded as neurodivergent, because there's that one
Mm-hmm.
scene where he has his movie theater coworkers and the
Right.
one guy who's like really heckling him and is like, why don't you look me in the eye, like, are you not capable of making eye contact? And so that was sort of what I was picking up on. And then it cut to him putting on the nightgown on one of those Saturday nights where they had the sleepover watching the show, and then I was like, oh, maybe I've misinterpreted this whole thing. Or I'm like, oh, maybe that's what it is, right? But so that was sort of my thing of like, there wasn't enough for me to, and I think that's on me, that there wasn't enough for me to grab onto to be like, oh, I understand what's happening here.
Maybe I also think it's intentionally kept open and vague so you don't there isn't the answer. Like that isn't
Mm.
the answer because did that happen that he put on a dress, or is that as Maddie is sort of telling this story of we are not Maddie and Owen, but we are it's Tara and something else. Is it Isabel? Those like
Isabel, yeah.
yeah. And it's like we are actually these characters. Like those aren't characters, those are us. And this is the fictional reality that we are trapped in by the big bad, the ultimately terrifying big bad, Mr. Melancholy. And that like that's the only time we see that happened. It's like, did that happen, or is that like the transformation into the character? So I do think it's left open because, like, to me, movie could just as easily be about someone who just doesn't feel comfortable for whatever reason. And it could be neurodivergence, it could be gender dysphoria, it could be questioning sexuality, it could be being asexual, like it could be anything. And it's like, I don't want to live in this small town, but then George Bailey style never gets to leave and is just in that house for his entire life, or at least as long as we see him. And so it's being trapped in there. And the one element that's in that bleacher scene that but both like adds more information but also doesn't answer the question you have,
Mm-hmm.
is that it starts with like him being like, can we get together and watch the show? And she's like, that like I like girls, like I don't want to go on a date with you. And he's like, yeah, no, that's fine. And she's like, do you like girls? Do you like boys? Like, basically, what's your deal? And he's like, I think I like TV shows. And
Yeah.
which I thought was great, both in terms of I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe I don't have an answer to that question. I know that this thing speaks to me, and that's what I'm connected to. And, again, like the fact that it isn't clearly defined, the fact that the movie ends without like an explicit answer of like, maybe Maddie is right. Or at least like, the she's symbolically right, even if it's not literally right. That we're left with a lot of questions. Basically, all we have is that sort of dread of that final like 10 or 15 minutes of the movie, which I thought was like, yeah, very harrowing, especially when there were some spooky, unnerving scenes like stemming from the sort of Lynchian, Cronenbergian elements that like invade the sort of relatively safe like young adult horror Nickelodeon story suddenly starts to get like creepier and creepier. But then we're really just left with this person who's seems to be living a very boring life that they don't really like, and that they're just not being who they really want to be. And
Right.
that's ultimately like the scariest thing that can happen.
Right. And that the only outlet they have, and this is the really interesting thing to me, that the TV show or watching TV was the outlet and the escape in a lot of ways, but it was also very menacing because especially at the end, right? Because like how devastating is it that he gets just a bigger TV? You know,
Right.
like for some reason that was like I was like, oh no, like that was like the sort of nail in the coffin for me in terms of like, yes, his life is really not going to change. And so it's just really interesting how it had that dual function where it's like TV, because I think the first part of like you find your real people through fandom and stuff, you know, like that to me, that's like largely the first half of the movie. Or that's the like, oh, you think this is just a like cute coming of age story where these awkward teenagers are finding each other through a television show that they like. That's what it seems like for like at least the first act, maybe like a little bit more than that. So to go from that to like him receiving a big screen TV in the mail and then watching shows on this show on streaming, for that to be so horrifying and devastating, it's just like really, I don't know, just yeah, really, really fascinating that both of those things seem opposed to each other, but also are true in this story.
Yeah, once the time jumps start and they get further and further down the road, that was really unnerving.
Yeah, and then like I mean, yes, I mean there's so much creepiness throughout this whole movie, as I mentioned in our non-spoiler section, but to me, what really lent to the creepiness of the moment of that final scene where he's like walking through was it Fun Time is the name of the it's like
Yes,
a
which
Chuck
is
E. Cheese
incredible.
type arcade. Yeah. Um he's walking through and then you hear the like, you know, um slot machine type sounds, arcade sounds, and he's just apologizing to everybody. It's to me what really elevated that scene visually is because it's the way it's lit and the fact that it's taking this like fun place supposedly.
Right.
And the movie constantly is doing this throughout, right? It takes something that is supposed to be fun and for children and then completely makes it so incredibly scary
Yeah.
and terrifying. Um
Yeah,
yeah.
for people who disavowed or ignored our warning and they kept listening to the spoiler part because they just don't care about spoilers in movies. I don't live your life. I don't know how you choose that. But if you're listening and you are like, oh, I didn't watch the movie and I wasn't planning on it. Again, you should. But just to give a quick kind of summary of it is there's our main character Owen. It meets an older girl named Maddy in his school who is into the show The Pink Opaque, which is the sort of Buffy-esque, like a Buffy X-Files, little Twin Peaks, like Twin Peaks Junior seeming show. And he's not allowed to watch it because it's past his bedtime, but he's been so intrigued by it. And so they start to bond over it. As time goes on, they watch it. She shares tapes with him. And then she disappears the night that the the series finale airs, that ends up being, or the season finale airs that ends up being the series finale because the show gets canceled.
Mm-hmm.
And she disappears. And there's like time goes by, we skip ahead, like that's everything I just said is like a couple of years. I think that's basically high school for him. And then like 6 or 8 years go by and she returns and gives him this story that like actually like she ran away and was trying to forge a new life and kept changing her name, but then realized that actually she's maybe the character in the show and the show is actually real and he's the other character in the show. And so they need to like bury themselves, like, you know, kill their current identities, and to like, so they could be reborn back in the 6th season of the show, and they're waiting for that to happen. And he rejects that and runs away. And so, yeah, I think that all that was to
And
say
that's
that,
arguably the second time he's done that, right? Because when they
yes,
were younger, she says, "Meet me here at this time and we're going to run away."
right.
And then instead he goes and self-reports.
So he self-reports that he's been lying to his parents so he could go to this girl, because I'm sure they would not. They seem very strict. They would not allow him to go to some girl's house, especially to watch a TV show. And a fun fact that I don't know if you know, but Jasmine was right on top of this. So he goes to the mom of the kid that he has been telling his parents, "I'm doing a sleepover at Johnny's or Justin's." I forget the name.
Justin?
Um, and and so the mom, his mom, drops him off at the house, and then he doesn't go in but walks over to Maddie's house instead. So he goes to the house of the boy that he says he's been staying at and rings the doorbell, and the mom answers, and he says, "Please tell my dad that I've been lying to him about being here, because I need him to ground me so I can't be tempted to run away, because he needs to stay because his mom is sick and all that." The actress playing that mom is a minor character on Buffy, who is named Tara, which is the
Whoa.
name of one of the main characters on
Characters
Pink
in the
Opaque.
Oh, that's
And the
amazing.
neighbors, when he leaves the house at one point and he's like unnerved by things, and there's just two neighbors who are talking, who turn and look at him, are Pete and Pete from The Adventures of Pete and Pete.
I thought they looked familiar.
So
I feel
those
like
are,
I probably missed, like, I soaked in the 90s aspect of this movie, but I could also tell that I'm missing half of these references, probably just because, like, I don't know. I didn't know what Fred Durst looked like, so I had to find that out after I watched the movie, that's who that
I
was.
mean, I will admit I forgot that was Fred Durst. I actually recalled because I was like, oh, right, Greg made fun of me for drafting this movie in the hype draft because Fred Durst was the
Oh,
name
that's right.
that showed up. And I was like, wait, oh, so the dad was Fred Durst. That makes sense. So I didn't get the resonance in the moment of because he's not a major character, but he looms large over the story as the
Mhm.
sort of authoritarian dad that this kid just can't talk to and he can't go to. But anyway, for people who didn't watch the movie, that was a brief and maybe not successful recap of what happens in it. But when Maddie comes back to be like, this is where I went, and this is I was in Phoenix, and then I was somewhere else, and now I'm I've realized I'm the character from the show, is this very long monologue that takes place in the converted planetarium in the cafeteria, which was not something that ever happened at my school, but like sounds like something I've heard other people talk about, that there was like planetarium week where like a fake planetarium. And the two of them talked about that in their first conversation early in the movie, that they loved when the school became a different place and it didn't look real
Mhm.
or didn't look like it normally did, related to what you were saying earlier of the image of those upside down tables. And so they're in the planetarium, and she gives us like, I think, incredible monologue that is not short, but like very moving, and a very moving performance. And one of the images that she says about her life is that she's like the claw in a claw game that is always reaching for something but never able to actually grab it. And
Mm.
so, there's just a lot of sort of seeds that get planted like that then pay off later. And so, yeah, seeing him mess around with the claw game and then walk past it at the end, and he's just apologizing to people who don't care and are like pay no attention to him, and he's just not something that's like important to them or part of their lives, and he is just living his life apologetically and just not being, he's covered up the true self, and is trying to get people to give him some recognition for having done that, and nobody cares, is really tough. I also like that he just throws out in one line, like, I had to start on my own family. I have a wife and kids who we never see and we don't spend any time with because they're not actually something that he wants or cares about.
Right.
What he wants is the bigger TV, because that's what he's doing, is bringing in the big TV when he talks about that. And he uses that, and he uses that to try to catch that old feeling when he watches the show again, but that he watches it on a streaming service and he's like, it actually is pretty bad. This is actually a bad show.
So, yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because it is really jarring how different the show seems in his, like, nostalgic version that he's remembering from when he was a kid versus if he watches it now. they basically seem like completely different types of shows.
Mm-hmm.
But the question I have is like, but the version that we see for most of the movie does feel very accurate to lots of actual 90s shows, right? A lot of them you've already mentioned, right? Especially the like the opening scene of Tara and Isabel when they're at their like sleepaway camp. It feels so like just the way it's shot and edited feels so like I want to say like Dawson's Creek or like something
Mm-hmm.
some teen drama from the 90s. It is so spot on. But then I feel like the quote unquote like, you know, real version that's like unvarnished by nostalgia, that it's a very short clip, but it almost feels like Full House or like some kind of 80s sitcom. You know what I mean? Like, or 90, I guess 90, it would be a 90s sitcom. But, you know,
Yeah, it's the like kids show, not the
mm,
young adult show. What I would say is that both of the versions we see are varnished. That we don't know what that show's actually like
sure.
as audience members. That was my takeaway on it. Is that like there's obviously this sort of like and there's the intense kind of again Buffy vibes, and like you said CW where it's a little bit older, and it has like those.
Please, back then it was UPN.
Oh, okay.
At least for me.
That's right. It was the WB and UPN, and then they merged into the
Yeah.
CW. So fair enough. So yeah, but was Buffy on UPN?
Buffy
or
was
was that Buffy WB?
WB.
Okay. Sorry. So WB style shows, which again was like young adult aimed or teenage aimed, and so like that's the sort of, oh, this is giving me this window into this other world, and it doesn't look like it's ultra sophisticated or it's an art film. It does look very accurately like those shows would look like. It never even sort of delves into being an adult show like a Twin Peaks, which I think it could have looked like maybe from their perspective. But I think that like looking back, and there's also the difference of it's streaming on a widescreen HD TV,
Right.
and so it doesn't have that like sort of pink or blue kind of tinge to it from the cathode ray tube element, and so it's like really kind of just harsh and does like very very childlike. That I think that's partially like what we're seeing is his perspective on it as like an adult. I think he's supposed to be in his 40s or 50s at that point, and is kind of just like, oh, this is childish. Like this doesn't
Ray says
actually
he's
like speak to
embarrassed.
me.
Right?
Yeah, and I think that I think we've all had that. I mean, we're our friends Dan and Manny on the nostalgia test. That's part of their whole thing, is being like, is this good or is this just something
They need to see this movie.
They do. Or is this just something I need? I hold nostalgia for, and I think that's a part of it. My guess is a not real show that exists is that the reality of it would be somewhere in between. That it had maybe more cheesy like, and we learned our lesson this week, of like a GI Joe cartoon of here's the moral of
Right.
what we learned fighting this monster, but that it isn't as like filled with like family circus characters as the streaming version seemed to him.
One of my favorite things though was because I think Maddy has a line pretty early on where she's like, no, show is not for kids. Like the lore and the mythology is way too advanced for the average child or something like that. And then they prove that to be true through, and this is what I was going to say was my favorite part of this, is how it communicates not through scenes of dialogue between these two characters, but the writing on the screen. And like the little doodles and all the like notes of like, this is episode whatever, and this is what happens, and this is the costume, and this is like all that sort of deep detailing that only someone who's a super fan of a show would care about.
Jen, I think we need to move into the rhetorical situation,
because yes,
that's it.
That's amazing. All right, so the rhetorical situation, a segment in which we look at a film through the lens of our academic experience. All right, so All four of our regular co-hosts are writing professors, so we like to have the section of the episode dedicated to making connections to our experience as scholars and teachers. And in the teaching of writing, the rhetorical situation specifically refers to any contextual factors that influence composing and interpretations. I think we've hit on a big one. PT, take it away.
Well, I didn't have anything planned for this. It
No,
was just
I
kind
know.
of like what you were saying. I was like, well, that's the rhetorical situation. But I do think that is one of the most memorable and mesmerizing scenes of the movie, which is this sort of time jump after Owen has finally seen the Pink Opaque with Maddy and Maddy's friend, who she quickly falls out of favor with, which is great, which a perfect like little character moment. Like something that I don't want to undervalue in this movie is like the really good specific details on many levels, including sort of how people at different ages deal with and interact with each other. So it's him walking through a hallway or hallways at his school, and on the screen is sort of like the handwriting of the notes that Maddy is leaving for him about the show and about the videotapes she's leaving, because she's taping the show and leaving the tapes for him in the dark room where images become clear, and so that's where yeah, so she's doing that, and then we're seeing kind of her working out the lore and being like, this is what this episode was, and the little doodles she does of like how the characters interact with each other, and it's absolutely incredible. Anyone who's ever made a mixtape or a mix CD, not necessarily a playlist, but something with tactile you had to like leave for someone else, that you know, not necessarily in a romantic way, but it's just someone you cared about and you want to like connect with. And if you've been a fan of something and you're like, I want to try to explain this, like this is what is happening, like you may not, I want to make sure you understand like what this means, and you know, some of the lingo and terminology and all that's like appearing around him on the screen as he walks down the hallway past people who do not pay any attention to him. He doesn't say hi to anybody, and a song plays that people on that Big Picture episode were very excited about, and I don't know that song, but I guess I think it's a cover of an LCD Sound System song, and Aaron Naiman, I guess, knows about the LCD Sound System song and was like, it's not as good as the original, but it's a good cover and it's used well. And so anyway,
Adam Naiman, who
Adam
is
Naiman.
referred to as Mean Pod Guy.
Yes. Who loved this movie and was explicitly on the episode of The Big Picture, so we could be positive about a movie because he's usually there to be negative. But yeah, the music component of this and the nostalgia baked in there was something that I didn't understand. Like all the, it's a lot of sort of current indie bands and popular bands covering some songs from the 90s that just and early 2000s that were not in my ken of music, which is my fault and not theirs. But anyway, yeah, it's this interesting multimodal presentation of you know, here's how people interact with each other, here's how the fandom kind of grows and shares, and also showing that like there's this relationship or this kinship, maybe is a better way of saying it, between Owen and Maddy, where he says like they never talked to each other for a couple of years, but he was always getting these notes and these sort of letters from nowhere that with these tapes so we could watch the show, and it's, you know, seeing this Spartan hallway with these very intense school slogans that seem to be about like serving in the military and, you know, standing up for American values.
I think one of them says, "Pain is weakness leaving the body."
Yes, it's this very, it feels like a very sort of traditional hyper masculine like approach to doing things. Where I was like, is this a public school? Like some of these don't seem legal, but yeah, that, you know, his sort of isolation in the image is overladen with this like very fervent relationship he's developing through writing and through these notes, which at least in that scene I think are only directed one way. It doesn't ever seem like we see him leaving a note for
he just
for
reply.
her asking any questions or thanking her or anything. But that's the sort of lead up to the aforementioned bleacher scene where he actually goes and talks to her and says, like, I want to watch this with you in person. She thinks he's asking her out, and they have that exchange. So yeah, I just think that there's so much in this about how how we communicate with each other, and I think it's very specifically of the time with this kind of a show and this kind of notes, and they can't text because they don't have cell phones, and maybe they have emails, but it doesn't seem like they ever like get on a home computer necessarily to do that. And so that's of the time, but I think it also just shows these different situations, different contexts in which people can connect and grow, and that fandom and sort of digging into the lore of fandom can facilitate that.
I like it. And I also feel like the font, I don't know. I don't know what I have to say about the font. I guess the font is pink because it's the Pink Opaque.
Mm-hmm.
But that also, the traditional gender stereotypes also seem to be kind of bubbling to the surface. And I'm thinking in particular of the moment in the car where the dad says, like, wasn't that a show for girls?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think that's also kind of like a subtext that it's like not just a show that he has with a friend to talk about with, but that it's a very specific type of show that everyone perceives as being gendered in some way, and that the font is pink and its name is Pink Opaque as like a part of all of that.
And that that's part of why he has to keep it hidden, and part of why I mean I think that's something that makes a ton of sense. In my memory of the time, I would have been like, I think 3 years older than him, so 1 year older than Maddy, because it's class of '96 when they when he's doing that walk through the hallway, which is my year. Go 96ers, I don't know. But that, like, if there's anything where it was just sort of like, well, this is outside the like norms of things, like some people would be willing to do that, but then that was, they were sort of labeled at that, like, okay, you're a weirdo, you're doing something strange. So that sort of confining feeling, that suffocating feeling, again, to sort of think about how there's teenagers that are just like, oh, the '90s, it was so great. It was like, well, not really, because there was also this where all the sort of problems that you hear now about strict gender roles, like imagine that being never questioned, or so rarely questioned that especially out in like the suburbs, you wouldn't ever actually see or hear that. So yeah, I thought that was interesting because, like, as he walked through hallways with windows, the windows would be shaded pink at times because he was like, he was thinking about it. And that also does sort of, because again, the TV glow, it sort of seems like there's a lot of light reflecting off of other things in this, and sort of seeing people's faces from external light sources, frequently TV screens. And so, yeah, I think there was something in that about the sort of pink coloring of all of this, and tying that into, we get very little from the dad, but like the one, that one line that I know that we get is like, well, shouldn't we be adhering to strict gender rules? Like, you're a boy, that's a show for girls. Like, that's the expanded version of it. But just like, isn't that a show for girls? Is like enough to be like, that's all you need to know. This is why he never wants to ask his dad a question. This is why he doesn't want to say, he always seems to be afraid to talk to his dad. That is the whole thing. Like, this is how this is a problem for him. Even though when he's in distress, the dad seems to try to help him when he's smashed his head through a TV.
Okay, this is gonna sound so silly. Like, what was happening?
What's real?
Okay, yeah, this is I've been sitting on for a very long time, and actually it does fit into the rhetorical situation as well, of the idea that, like, does a movie like this need to have quote unquote rules? And I feel stupid actually even saying this now, but like, does a movie like this have to have rules in order for us to interpret it in a particular way? You know what I mean? Like, and by that I mean, because a big question I have in general that I really just do want an answer to is, how much of this is actually real? Like, are we dealing with magical realism? Are we dealing with Maddie's delusions? because that also seems to be a possibility, or at least that's the way that Owen responds to Maddie's like, "Oh no, this is what's really happening. The show is real," and he's just like, "You're crazy. No." like, so, and I get that the point might be they're competing narratives, right? And that's kind of the whole point. And which one is real and which one is validated and not, right? So like, just that's why I'm saying, like, just me asking this question and wanting an answer to it is I'm part of the problem. I think is that's what this movie's trying to tell me. Um, but that was the thing I was really hung up on. I was like, okay, because I really wanted it to either be one or the other. I wanted it to be Maddie was right, and the movie confirmed this, and then I would understand. Okay, everything I'm watching is in the context of like they don't realize it's supernatural, but it actually is, and like the meta is the literal, and like you know what I mean. Like I
I
needed
do.
needed some guidance there, I guess.
I hear you, and I was feeling similarly as the movie unfolded. I really thought we were going to see Maddie one more time, one way or the other, and that was going to provide some clarity. And I feel like when the movie ends, when it ends with him, he had that sort of disassociative moment. Everyone freezes. He starts screaming. Maybe or maybe not. That actually happened, or that was just in his head. And then he
Right. What is he apologizing
then
for?
he
We
locks
don't
himself in
actually
the
know.
bathroom. He cuts his chest open, and there's the staticky TV, old staticky TV of the Pink Opaque inside him. And then he leaves and he's apologizing to everybody. The movie ended, and I feel like, or it cuts to sort of black, or it cuts to sort of a light fuzz, which again fits the model things. And I feel like there was a sense in the theater of like, like what? Why wasn't it? That's it? Like there wasn't more. Ultimately, as I have reflected on it, I think it's better that there isn't an answer, but I also recognize that is unsatisfying. That like there isn't, like I think, yeah, you're right. There's no answer to your question. I think that it's left so both interpretations are valid. I think that the whether it is actual magical realism or actual just like beyond that, like fantastical
Mhm.
world, or if it's just sort of impressionistic of sort of how he remembers these things and how he felt about it, in his reflection, is left open for interpretation. I think that the feeling of you had a choice, like, or you constantly have a choice whether you want to be your true self, and he's continually choosing to not do that, and that is the sort of dread and the horror and that sort of the awful feeling of it all that like weighs it, can kind of weigh on you at the end of the movie, that like that's true. Everything else is open for interpretation, but that's the emotional truth of what's
Right.
happening. And so yeah, that
Because
may be
he tries to scrub, and this was really, I was not did not see this coming, but one of the most intimate scenes in the entire film is when Maddie draws the little boo ghost, the
Yes.
pig. That's what they look like to me.
They,
um, the little I also just love it as a device, like, and how it's
yes.
also glowing like the TV, right? Like I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that's really clever. But yeah, Maddie draws the ghost on Owen to sort of be like, yeah, we are connected. We are like, I'm marking you as a
Right.
part of this, right? And we cut immediately to him frantically panicking, trying to scrub it out
Right.
in the shower, right?
Which is interesting because then, at that point, it's tied to like her, so she does that, and that's when she's like, I'm running away next Saturday, like bring whatever you can carry in your bag, we're leaving, we'll figure out where we're going when we get there, but like we're getting out of this town. If I stay here, I'm gonna die, is what she says like a couple of times. And at the time he's like, I'm not gonna do that because his mom is sick and his
Mhm.
mom is awesome, like Danielle Detweiler, just like killing it in a small role, and comes across as like super nurturing and supporting and like doing the best she can. And so I was like, yeah, don't leave. You can't leave. She'll be so sad. And like, they say that she doesn't live that much longer. But again, it is an interesting, I sort of threw it out randomly earlier, but like the positive version of this arc is It's a Wonderful Life, where it's like this person really wants to leave, but they never do. But that's actually a good thing because they're entrenched in this community, and even though they aspired to all this other stuff, they were doing so much good for the people around them and also for themselves. and this is like, there's all these valid reasons why this person wants to stay here, but all they're doing is slowly killing themselves from the inside because they're not acknowledging their truth that they need to leave,
Right.
and they have to get out of there. And I think probably just very different filmmakers and very different storytellers who have different lived experiences. This feels like a story that is, I'm glad it's being told. But yeah, I agree that like that was one of the most sort of, that was the only time where I was like, maybe these kids can make it work. Like, what if they're just both bisexual and not asexual or anything like that, and they're just gonna fall in love because it was so like close. I was like, I want them to be friends forever, or get together in some way. But yeah, it's an immediate like, I can't let this be seen. I can't let this be known. I have to just sort of try to stay. And again, it's this like buttoning it up, which I think, the people I saw that letterbox review in particular, I thought was the most poignant version of it. But there are other ones where they're all just like, yep, this is what it's like to realize like am like experiencing complete dysphoria between every expectation I had in set up for me and what people around me think and how I actually feel. And I'm like, it's this like that image of I've been hollowed out inside and I don't know what's in there. I'm worried. I'm scared to look about what might happen. Seems to really resonate with people. So yeah,
I really thought we were just gonna open up to just an empty chest cavity. Because I'm like, oh yeah, the heart is missing. Because the heart is I guess I just
right.
really wanted to be
You
in
wanted
the
it to be
show.
real. Yeah.
I wanted the Pink Opaque to be real.
How in retrospect, in the moment I really liked it, but in retrospect I liked it even more when he is like seeing the interaction with the evil villain on the show coming to him as Maddy describes it in her monologue, and like of all the sort of things that were like, yeah, oh, it's a little bit like actually spooky Buffy X-Files 90s TV style thing. The Mr. Melancholy guy in the moon was like a very cheesy, like it almost looked like the Trip to the Moon silent movie guy, and like kind of looked goofy. And they're like, oh, that's the big bad guy, like reference to Smashing Pumpkins up there in the sky. And then he appears as like the like super evil version of Mac the Knife from the McDonald's commercials, and his like the moon around him is like decomposing and recomposing in like a CGI, which I at first I was like, oh, this is smart. By the time the fifth season would have aired, they'd have cheap CGI on this show. So that's what's happening. But then it's just getting like creepier and like the facial features are
really
morphing. Very unnerving. And is all about how it's just like, you just drink the moon juice, you drink the Luna juice, and you go to sleep, and you don't have to worry about all this anymore. Yeah, very very unnerving. That was the most unnerving scene until the very end when the existential crisis really hit.
And the Luna juice in particular feels very allegorical or metaphorical. Like there's certain things in the Pink Opaque mythology that feel so figurative. And then there contrast that with moments where the film is like, oh no, this is literally what's happening.
Right.
Which I thought was enjoyable, but again, like I'm craving. I need someone to whisper in my ear, like, oh no, it was real.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to do it to you, but we don't know.
I know.
And I think that they do leave it intentionally open so you can do with it whatever you want. But yeah, I see that being frustrating, and that's one of the things where it's like I kind of want to tell people back in our spoiler-free zone about like, hey, you might end up frustrated by the end of this movie because like there aren't necessarily clear answers. The emotional truths are clear and well defined. The actual like plot or the actual sort of events of what unfolds are left very up in the air and unclear. I also like that there's the and I don't know the name of it because it's interesting. All the sort of touchstones for this movie are things I didn't connect with in the 90s. X-Files, Twin Peaks, and Buffy are all shows that because it was the 90s and the way these things worked, I heard about them after they started, and I was like, well, I missed the beginning, so I'm just not going to watch this. I just didn't. I decided I wouldn't. I would wait until I could watch them all the way through, and then I haven't. Like, I just haven't. I've watched the first episode of Twin Peaks like 5 times, and then been like, oh, that's cool. Like, I wonder how the rest goes, but then never actually gone.
Wait, you've never watched Twin Peaks?
No, I've never seen a second of The Return. I've only watched the first episode like 5 times, and I'm always like, this is a bad. We can discuss this separately. I appreciate David Lynch more than I like David Lynch, so I'm always just like, yeah, I get it. Like, yeah, everything's weird. Okay. And so,
but the genius of Twin Peaks is that it gets away with being weird because it's rooted in this like noir mystery.
Yeah.
True crime.
I know.
Whatever,
I know I should watch it. I like that first episode, and that it's like, it never propels me forward to keep watching. Like, I feel like I'm done with it after one, like, I'll come back to it later, and then like years go by and I'm like, I forget.
I didn't watch it till way later. I had seen we're really getting off track here, but I had seen, as you predicted, I had seen like the first few episodes probably when I was in grad school, like, you know, like in the mid 2000s or whatever. But then it was when my son was born in 2019, and I'm awake every 3 hours.
Oh, right.
Which
one at a time.
If you're a parent, or you know you're a parent, that's just a period you have to deal with where, like, somehow, I don't know how our species has survived this long. Somehow you have to only sleep for 2.5 hours at a time, and you're constantly waking up all around like 24 hours a day, for like months. And Twin Peaks, all of Twin Peaks, followed by Veronica Mars.
Oh, nice.
That defined my, like, when my son was an
infant. That's how you raised your child.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So,
well, all that was to say is that, like, Buffy is another show that I've only seen like bits and pieces of along the way, but I have been made aware that the sort of the dive bar where the guest bands would play is a Buffy trope. In my mind, it's very Beverly Hills 90210. But I like that when Maddy comes back and is like, we need to go to this place on the outskirts of town to discuss like what actually happened. And
it's also kind of a Twin Peaks thing too.
Okay.
Like,
well, that makes sense.
Or David Lynch.
Like, there are, as mentioned earlier, when she's talking about the guidebook in the very beginning of the movie, she's like, oh, there's a breakdown of the 2 guest bands that are in each episode. That there's always 2 musical acts in every episode, and we get 2 different musical acts where we stop and like listen for like 2 minutes each to a song that the band's performing. And one of them is Phoebe Bridgers with a band that I guess she used to be in, and the other one is a screaming like punk person. And great. Like, that was very like, that was a moment where I felt like, oh, that was one of the few times where I was like, we're in a 90s experience, like which makes sense in the context of the story, that the line starts sort of blurring between I'm someone who watches this show and I'm, you know, dealing with my own emotions and experiences with this versus like I'm in it. That was the closest I felt we got to being in it, was in that location, which had that. Now that you've said it, that makes a lot of sense from what I know about it. That's a very Twin Peaksy vibe. And here's Savage Garden, like playing a song that, like, you know, a band, a popular band, or a band that was like liked by the people who made the show, got to come on and do something.
I'm gonna follow that up with a much less intelligent comment, and I just need to say before we finish this episode, the Fruitopia vending machine,
yes,
in the background,
killer.
I was blown away because I had completely forgotten that Fruitopia, it was a thing, and that was like, again, like, stupidly, that was the one thing when I saw it, I was like, we're in the 90s.
You're like, Leo meme.
Yeah, basically.
My favorite of those moments, and I don't want to. This feels like borderline stolen valor as someone who's not a woman, B, not queer, and C, certainly not a queer woman. But the 2 girls in the beginning, Maddy and her friend, try to be like, who are the hot guys? It's like Evan Dando, Michael Stipe, you know, Paul from Algebra. It was just like, oh, that felt perfect. That was a very like, both that seemed like an accurate conversation between those 2 characters, and also that those would be the 90s celebrities that girls that are maybe on some level questioning their sexuality would be like, I find Michael Stipe like appealing for a man. Like that's someone I could say I'm attracted to, who has like qualities that I may actually find appealing. That was a nice touch.
We should do a quick Oscars watch where we contemplate, does this movie have any Oscars prospects? I also just feel like this movie this music is like the exact opposite vibe of this
Right.
movie.
It's yeah. Like I'm trying to think of that movie as he walks down the hallway, or that music as he walks down the hallway, and like stuff's happening all around him.
Oh yeah.
That would be pretty funny.
So, is this movie too small for the Oscars? Too horror-y? Too genre-y? It's a lot of things.
I think so. The thing that I was like could happen is the original screenplay nomination. Like that's where they get double the slots because they have original and adapted. That's where they like to sort of be like, here's a weird movie that I guess some people liked. Here you go. And especially like up and coming filmmakers. So that feels like it could be there. I wonder like if the things that we have been discussing, both the sort of touchstone of 90s culture and also the ambiguity that's involved in the story, are both things that for the wider academy, which is gotten younger and more diverse, however, is not that young and not that diverse, if they'll just sort of be like, I don't know, what is this? Like, what? I don't understand. I don't know what's happening here. But if it like the first point of weakness on the Academy defenses would be original screenplay, and after that, it kind of depends on again like how the rest of the year is. Like, is it possible this ends up being a movie that's really well liked, and there's a lot of things that kind of stumble, and then there's suddenly like, do we want to come back to this for some like production design things about how they do the 90s. I don't think it would get to like a cinematography level, but that seems,
I mean, I
that
can see
seems
that, and honestly,
possible.
production design is probably what I personally would give it. But in a year where we have Dune and Furiosa,
It's not going to win, but like, could it get in as a
but it would be too I'm saying nominations might even be too crowded based on that. You know what I mean?
That's true. And it's much more likely if there's a movie set in Victorian or Edwardian times, there's like, ooh, the production design, as opposed to like 1996, which most people in the Academy remember. And that doesn't resonate in a similar way.
But I mean, a lot of the criteria for production design is creating a whole other world unto itself that you get immersed in, and I feel like this movie fits that bill pretty well.
I would also, I mean, if this is I would be interested in an acting nomination for Bridget Lundy Payne, who plays Maddy. Now that's a performer who is non-binary, so I don't like that. I don't know if it would happen, if only because there's kind of a ticking clock on like when the Academy has to finally decide what they're going to do with a situation where it's like, okay, someone is like, I am non-binary.
I am neither an actor nor an actress.
So I am not. What's happening? Like, where would you put me? Would assume just because she's a female presenting character in the movie that they would try to be like, oh yeah, best actress, or maybe supporting actress. I think she's prominent enough; it would probably be best actress. But it would, that would open a whole door and become a whole conversation, which they probably would be more than happy to avoid, because this is a small movie. That's not a good thing, but I do think that would be a potential impediment. But if there was someone for a performance who would be nominated, that's the person who I think it would be. I would love to sort of be like Danielle Deadweiler, because she's so overdue, but like she doesn't do that much in this movie. She's great in the couple of scenes she has, but I think
the Oscar clip probably would be when they're sitting on the couch watching the show and she's just crying. And
That's pretty
then
good.
Justice Smith looks over and is like, "Oh my god!" Like,
I think it's that. I mean, or it's part of the monologue. Like she has a monologue and then eventually
oh, that's
turns
true.
to the camera and like addresses the camera about it. But maybe that's all that would be too bizarre. It would probably be the like, I went to Phoenix, I changed my name, blah blah blah, and which Phoenix rebirth, of course, is very obvious. And then that ending with being like Maddy and her being like, that's not my name, which I think also very transcoded
Mhm, mhm.
of trying to be like, I'm here, I'm telling you I'm a new person, and your old friend who's just sort of like, this is crazy and not true, is sort of another layer to that scene, which maybe doesn't make sense in a Academy Awards clip.
Mhm.
But
Oh, that
yeah,
moment when they break away from each other is so tragic at the
on
end.
the football field.
Yeah, and whatever you just said made me reminded me of the line that the mom has. And yes, like she does come across as very nurturing and supportive, but she also says, and I feel like I saw someone comment on this in a letterbox review, so I just want to put that out there. It's not 100% original. But the mom says, "I just want to make sure you're on the right path."
Yes.
And it's very clear that these are two characters on two different paths.
Yes.
And Owen is on what society believes is the right path, but for him is not the right path, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
no
I
good.
mean, it, again, I feel bad summarizing it as like, this movie's difficult, but like I think intentionally opaque, potentially Pink Opaque. Uh, P.S. A reference to the Cocteau Twins, which is a Scottish band. That's
Oh
one of
yeah.
their compilation albums. I think is a lyric from one of their songs. But I'm going to throw that out there.
Wait, you
To
mean the title? I saw the TV glows from.
No, sorry,
Oh
the
no,
Pink
because
Opaque,
that's from a song too.
the show within a show. Yeah, well, I mean, one of the songs performed in the bar has "I saw the TV glow" in the verse. I don't know if it's in the chorus, but yeah, they say "I
Hmm.
saw the TV glow" a couple times. But yeah, that it's the movie is a little opaque and is challenges you to sort of be comfortable with being uncomfortable with what's happening, but I think it's really rewarding. I don't know. I don't think it's going to make a lot of money. I don't think it's going to get me a lot in the hype draft results. I don't think it's going to get a lot of awards, and I don't think it's going to make a lot of
But you're
money.
personally very happy with it,
But
so
I am. I am.
that's a
No,
win.
this was this. I'm very glad. And again, this is not necessarily. I think that part of why this is really smart is couching it in this sort of like nostalgia bait. I also think that's the other thing I wanted to talk about. That's what it was. Is how like this is also like separate from it being about identity and gender identity and sexuality and all those elements that are clearly key to I think to the creator and certainly to a lot of people who've responded to it. I also think just as a story about nostalgia and like how we define things that we care about to ourselves and how it becomes really important. I just kept thinking, and I joked about that we'd be bringing it up before we started recording, but like I was just thinking of all those people who hate everything about Star Wars now, but are like, I'm a huge Star Wars fan because they loved Star Wars when they were 10 and 11 and they watched the original movies, or they watched the originals and the prequels because they're that age. And then they're like, all this other stuff and it sucks and it all looks cheesy and it's all bad and they don't do it right because they don't know about blah, blah, blah. They didn't read the visual guide of the role playing game and the trading cards from 1994, and like they have this sort of catalog of information of what they think is the real thing and what's the important stuff, and it's not coming through and it's not clear and it's not about them anymore, and they don't feel the connection, and they also don't feel the same way when they watch it on their big LG TVs instead of their little CRT sets in their bedroom, and they're asking like, why doesn't this hit the same way? Why doesn't it feel the same way? And why am I not getting the nostalgia hit that I was looking for? And that this movie can just as much be about that and about being trapped in sort of in the past and sort of in the choices you make when you are at a certain point in your life, even just about your entertainment consumption and the things that you're interested in, as much as it can be about sort of your identity as a grown up and as a real human being out in the world. It can also be about that, about how invested we get, and how we deal with that investment in our stuff, in our worlds, in our fictional universes.
The villain of the sequel of this movie is the reboot of the Pink Opaque.
Yes. That'd be incredible. I didn't actually read it because I was scrambling looking for quotes to open the episode, but I guess the writer director did say there's like a sequel idea, which I'm assuming is going to be like a joke, or some sort of like quip about the movie. But it kind of would be incredible if they revisited it. Like it would be great, especially I don't know if there's a way to do it without it being like, and we're with Maddy when they wake up as Tara in the show, and they have to just go forward. But yeah, a reboot of the Pink Opaque and how people react to that would be a fun.
I mean, it'd be a very
spin-off.
different movie in terms of its agenda, yes. but I definitely think is interesting to contemplate. Like, what is the version of this movie in the 2020s look like? Right.
Right.
It's probably dealing with a reboot of the Pink Opaque.
Now I'm looking at this. It's a USA Today story, and I think I was wrong. It doesn't seem like it's a joke.
Wait, really?
They have an idea for a sequel. They've talked to the actors, and like they don't know if they'll do it, but they're like, it's something. It would be in a few years. We would come back to it.
I mean, again, this is revealing about how basic a viewer I am, but I would totally watch the film length feature version of the Pink Opaque. You know what I mean? Like
that would be incredible.
Like I would.
That would be great.
And again, I think me wanting that, I'm the butt of the joke of this movie, right? Like, or I don't know, that's the wrong way to say it. I'm the problem. It's me. Hi.
I don't know if it's a problem, but I think that sounds great because, it would be like maybe on the Blu-ray, like on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, you can watch the Bounty Law episode that they filmed to get all the clips of Leo as on his TV show. That maybe they have a 20-minute episode of Pink Opaque.
Because the 90s kid in me was like, I need to know more about the show. Like, can we show more of the Pink Opaque? Like,
right.
Really. And I didn't even actually really watch a ton of Buffy when I was younger. I watched some. I feel like this is putting me on the wrong side of history, but like I was more of a Charmed watcher.
Oh,
remember the show?
Yeah, I do. There was a Charmed rewatch happening in my house not that long ago. I think it petered out once Shannon Doherty left, but it was yeah. I don't know if it holds up to this in the same way that Buffy does. As someone who was not a watcher of either, but I have nothing but respect for all of the attractive women that came out of both of those shows. That was my main relationship with both of those shows at the time.
That makes a lot of sense.
Anyway,
should we end this show?
Yeah, should we stop talking about this movie? Allegedly, we just fell into 90s nostalgia. For those coming back, or for those who don't realize they missed something very, very similar to the dream sequences or the dreamlike logic of some of this movie.
We
so too will this episode.
Skipped ahead like chapters on a DVD.
Yes, perfect. What a line! What a line!
It was a really good line. Anyway, PT, thank you for helping me come to terms with my interpretation of this movie, or as people have probably realized by now, a lack of interpretation of this movie.
I wouldn't call it a lack because I feel like I had a similar feeling of like I want to know if this is literally true, and I did think for most of that last like 20 minutes or so of like we're gonna find out like Mr. Smashing Pumpkin, Mr. Melancholy is going to show up and it's going to be a thing. There's going to be like a break in reality. Again, I think I like the movie more because it didn't have that, but I did expect it and was a little disappointed in the moment that we didn't get it. So now that we've talked about it though, Jen, I mean, you're processing it like almost on the fly. You only saw it a few hours ago. How do you now feel about this? To close this out, I want to know how you feel now.
I think my rating of this goes up, I think, because you've pointed out why the ambiguity is kind of important to the story. And my own knee-jerk reaction to it, I think, has now been recontextualized in a way that makes me appreciate it more. So yeah, no, I really enjoyed this movie. I think this was a good on you. This was a good hype draft pick. I'm glad the movie sort of lived up to the Sundance hype. Um, but who knows if we'll hear about it ever again. That's kind of
Yeah.
where I'm at. You know what I mean? Like this movie could just be a blip and everyone forgets about it.
This feels like a movie. It's just as possible, if not more possible, the next time I hear about it is like it's being programmed at the midnight at one of the local rep theaters in like 4 years, as opposed to ever hearing about it in the end of the year. Maybe some like hip critic types will put it on their top 10 list, maybe including me. I don't know. Trying to, but maybe that's also just trying to pump up my hype draft.
Who knows? Maybe this will show up at the second annual Letters Awards.
That's true. That's true. If we can go deep into the below the line categories, which we never will, because that would be absolutely insane. Then this would definitely
we'd have to do a second episode just for that.
Yes. But I also just think none of us really feel enough of an expertise to be able to be like, that deserves production design. That said, this deserves a production design nomination. I don't think I would give it over Dune Part 2, let alone potentially Furiosa.
Yeah. Which we now have heard is good. So
you've heard good things. So anyway, yeah. But yeah, potentially original screenplay. You could see me scrapping for I Saw the TV Glow in the original screenplay. Letter Awards coming to you January 2025. It may come in seconds because that's how time passes these days.
Amazing. And remind everybody where they can follow us and find the show.
You can find the show wherever you get fine podcasts. So wherever you're listening right now, please subscribe. Why don't you can like it. You can leave a rating and a review. That would help with visibility. We would really appreciate that. So do that wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. You can also follow us on Instagram or Threads at The Long Take Review. You can follow us on Letterboxd at LTR Pod, or you can send us an email with your comments or questions, thelongtakereview@gmail.com.
And you can find me at Subchakchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI on Instagram and Threads, and Qui-Gon Jen on Letterboxd.
There's still time. There's still time.
Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.
But when I was in college, I didn't have HBO, and my mom taped The Sopranos like 3 episodes at a time and mailed me the videotapes.
So that's amazing.
And that was like, there's a few times I have to give her credit for being on top of something. Night of the premiere, she watched it. She had seen print ads in Entertainment Weekly, saw the show was coming out. She called me at 10:02. The show premiered at 9, and she was like, "This show is incredible. Did you watch it?" I was like, "I don't have HBO. I live in a dorm." And she was like, "Okay, I'm gonna tape it.
I got you.
Mail it to you." And so like I would, and then like more and more people just like come to my room, and we would like have like Sopranos watch parties every 3 weeks because we get 3 episodes at a time, and we would watch it. So that was it's weird to sort of be like, yeah, my mom, instead of like the girl that's the only girl that I like I'm friends with, and my only like true friend, which is the sort of place for the character. But that like experience of here's this thing, and that you have a tactile, mixtapes very similar of just sort of like, here I'm sharing this with you, I'm adding my annotations to it, I'm making it my own thing. My mom's thing would be folding in newspaper articles or magazine articles she cut out about The Sopranos that would be like in the sleeve, which that's very like her thing to do. So
see, by the time I was in college, people were burning DVDs of pirated shows.
Oh, incredible. There was something I saw around this where people were like, yeah, in like 2002, in the early days of the internet. And I'm just like, early days? Like a summer child. Like I was deep. I'd been on it a decade at that point. Like, what are you
Yeah.
talking
Well, they're
about?
not
And there were
counting dial-up,
nerds,
I think, when they say that, right?
I guess, but like, but they're
You can't
talking about
count it.
like mailing lists and forums and stuff. It's like, no, like those are the BBSs. Like those things were out there. People, I was on Prodigy. I'm talking about things in the Prodigy channels. Like, what are we doing here?